Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Tonight, for your quintessential poetry listening pleasure, poet Benjamin Goldberg is here. Benjamin's poetry is growing in acclaim, and he has been featured in a number of well-known journals. Welcome, Benjamin, to the program. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Great. I'm glad you're here. Are you ready to begin this poetic journey?
I can't wait.
All right. What is poetry, Benjamin? Talk to me.
I have been writing it off and on in some capacity since probably about third grade, and I'm still not entirely sure how to answer that in a meaningful way. To me, it's really the only form of communication that I've found that actually captures the way that I think and the way that I understand the world. And I remember kind of being in situations where things wouldn't make sense to me, and then poem that would come in those situations, and the poem would kind of unlock something that I wasn't understanding. So it's really a way of understanding the world and understanding how I function within it.
All right. I like that, a way of understanding the world and how you function in the world. Tell me more about poetry. What else is to you? Anything else?
I think one of the difficulties I have with this question in particular, which is what makes it, I think, such a good question, is I think it's so many things, and it is in so many different contexts, to so many different people. It can be anything, really. For instance, I teach high school, and this is something that we talk about with my students a lot. We ask that same question, and the conversation usually focuses around kind of, is it an implementation of poetic elements? Is it kind of something true coming from a person to another person? Is it all of these things? And one thing that I tell them, and this is the honest truth, is there isn't a single day in the hallway that I don't hear somebody say something that belongs in a collection of poetry, or belongs in a magazine, or belongs in an anthology. So I think it is maybe, again, one of the most authentic ways of communication, and kind of true to how we think and how we naturally speak.
Wow.
There's this misnomer, I guess you could call it, that poetry has to be abstract, it has to be obscure, it has to be inaccessible, and I don't necessarily find that to be the case. I think this is something that is just, it's in us.
Wow. Very nice. It's been a long time since I've been in high school. A really long time. Do kids care about poetry? Do they care about it?
The answer varies. It depends on how it's taught, and and I'll share some culpability here. It's not always taught the greatest. Okay. But I will say I've heard poems. I've heard poems silence rooms, kind of the way that when you're reading. I've heard poems that speak to virtually every person in that room in some sense. I've heard students without any sort of quote unquote literary training kind of talk about poetry with the same reverence that anyone in the poetry world would. So can care about it when it's shown to be, when it's shown to be something that can have meaning to their lives.
Wow. I'm already learning so much. This is only the first couple of seconds of the program. To hear from a teacher's perspective, and when you made the statement that kids in the hall make statements that are potentially poetry, and I'm sure they are in many different ways, that's very powerful, extremely powerful. So why is it important? Why is it important that we do what we do? I just want to know.
I think, I think the answer to that, again, it varies so much from poet to poet. And I think there are some poets that talk about poetry in the sense that it can, communicate a truth. Some poets from the standpoint of affecting a change or kind of bringing visibility to an experience. I think it can instruct, it can entertain, it can delight, it can distract, it can do all of these things. It can be a form of activism. I know that is not really a notion that's in fashion right now, but I believe that it can be, just like any other form. I think for me, it is a form of survival. And I'm sure that that's something we'll talk about. I don't know kind of what brings you to poetry, but I think a lot of poets, myself included, it's a way of being here and staying here.
Yes. Survival brought me here.
Yeah.
I can't lie and make it some grandiose statement about it. It was survival.
Yeah.
It was survival of the fittest, and for me, poetry was my way to stay alive. Now, as you think about your work, my friend, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. I think a lot of people also, that statement, they think it's hyperbole, right? Or it can sound like hyperbole, but it's not. Like, this is how so many of us stay here. That's all I wanted to add to that.
All right. I already like talking with you. This is nice. All right.
Thank you.
As you think
Likewise.
about your body of work, what are some of the predominant themes?
One of the subjects I explore in the most depth is kind of lived experience with mental health, mental illness specifically. I'm diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I have other diagnoses, but that is the diagnosis I would say is kind of most accurate and kind of most consistent with my lived experience. So that, not that, I'm out here writing poems that talk about that specifically or that name that specifically, although there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's important. It's really the lived experience. The poet Terrence Hayes, who has been for years one of my favorite poets, I kind of came to this idea through him, really, the idea that instead of writing politics, you write through the personal. And since politics is a dimension of the personal, it will come through. So writing about mental illness, specifically borderline, through that lens of lived experience is something that I really try to do as authentically as I can.
Well, as someone who lives also with mental illness, poetry is just, I don't know how to put it into words. And as you say, it means different things to different people. But when you're dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, borderline, whatever, having an outlet is extremely important. Please share a poem.
Absolutely. Sure. Actually, this poem kind of focuses on what we were just talking about. This is called Fugue with Allegory and Intake Room, and this is from a collection that I've been working on for a long time now. And fugues are kind of one of the recurring poem sequences. So this one is Fugue with Allegory and Intake Room. A nurse skims plasma from your day-old wolf tattoo. Another sweeps the muzzle with latex fingers, jotting down undocumented scar tissue. You won't find a safer place to sleep. Behind the Sonic parking lot last week, your beater's backseat felt reupholstered with tater tots and razors, transfigured by your dough stream. When you stumbled down the gulch beyond the dumpsters, you spent hours there pretending snow was gauze. Tonight, each room has a name. Day, quiet, authorized persons only. Tonight, a boy beside you sweeps so wildly, his sigh grows burning hooves and gallops through cinder block into the blizzard. In the morning, a man your memory will call the clipboard explains. Your sickness is a statue. Your sickness is two brothers draped in stone and mounted above two iron gates. The left reclined, the right in chains. You spend hours flipping swords and flowers into piles, reading bubbles scribbled onto face cards. You contribute to the conversation. Clothed in skin, you play lightning without laces. He hands you paper cups, and your blood greets angels by their chemical names. From here, the view constricts. A quarter-acre of clover field, high beams on the muted interstate. Your ritual before a dosage wins. List the lunatics you count as kin. Imagine what they'd weave from what your eyes are given. Flowers filling links of diamond wire, a full night's sleep from floodlight. There aren't gardens. You fail at sleep. Between your window and its mesh, an emerald beetle will time-lapse in dust. Your task. The glassless mirrors don't believe you. Before you leave, they must. Thank you.
Benjamin, what is the purpose of that poem?
This, I think, is one of the quotes that's been stuck in my head, and I got this quote from the poet Tiana Clark, who is another poet I love a lot, whose work I love a lot, and she quoted it from somebody, and I can't attribute the quote properly except to say I got it through her. Essentially, aren't we writing the same damn poem over and over? And kind of with that idea, this is one of my many attempts, one of my many damn poems to try to consolidate this period in my life that I'm still, this notion that we just get over things or we grow out of them. I don't know how much of that is actual messaging we get, how much of that is what I project onto what I hear, but this notion that we leave these moments, and these moments leave us is kind of, it's alien to me. And this is one of my attempts to, I'd say this was about a 4-year period that I was on enough medication that basically kept me asleep for 12 to 18 hours a day.
I understand.
Yeah. And that's, if you don't have that experience, it's so hard to communicate that to people.
Yes.
And yeah.
So when you think about writing a piece of poetry, how does it begin with you or for you? With an idea, a form, or an image? And maybe you've already answered that, but I just want to go in detail. How does it begin for you?
That's a really good question. I would say it can begin with any of those things. I would say for me, what brought me to poetry first was sound. And, there was a poem I heard read aloud that, it was the first poem that I heard read aloud that just kind of captivated me. And it was a sound poem. It was a slam poem, as a matter of fact. And it was more than just falling in love. It was, that was what I wanted to be filled with, that sound. That's what I felt like I was filled with. It's like, that was the first poem that made me, I don't know, I felt like the way that I thought was echoed in that. And the way I wanted to think was echoed in that. So with me, again, I'm kind of getting away from your question, but it's a sound, it's a cadence, it's an image. Very seldom is it a thing that I want to say, or a subject that I want to explore, although sometimes as kind of like an exercise, I'll push myself to talk about something that I don't typically feel comfortable talking about. Some poems start as conversations that I have with myself out loud. I'm working on a poem right now that I'm really kind of into it, and it began back in 2021 when was talking about coming out of quarantine, and I was kind of pacing around the pond and having this conversation out loud. And some poems begin as conversations that I have out loud with myself.
Right. Now, do you have that particular piece with you?
I do. It's not in necessarily a readable state, but I've got a few lines of it.
I'd love to hear them.
Really? Sure. Okay. I would actually. love to share them. This is called, sorry, let me pull up my, so actually this one comes with a little bit of an explanation, if that's okay.
Yes.
So, kind of what we were talking about earlier a few seconds ago, like, it is really hard to explain certain aspects of living with mental illness, and a lot of people don't really like to hear it, it feels like.
Yes.
And which is, I don't want to say it's fine, but it is kind of what it is. But I would be okay, or I would find a way not talking about it, although I don't think that's the healthiest thing. But people have ways of probing and overstepping and overreaching and kind of transgressing against those boundaries. So, you know, I remember, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, and I'm struggling, but one that's coming to mind is kind of one recurring thing that I've experienced is people commenting on my affect, or, you know, the fact that I'm not outgoing, or that I'm kind of silent in certain circumstances. And like, there are so many stories behind that. And I just wish that I could be in a space without that being challenged, or without that being, you know what I mean? So
yes,
this is called, it's rough sometimes.
Yes, it is.
It's called a flowchart for the next time someone asks about my doll affect. And this began as just a rant as I'm circling this pond, just like, you know, somebody had done it, and I was just fuming. And of course, in the moment, I said nothing, and I just blinked at them. But and here are the lines. Person A meets person B. Present day. Adjudicators bind the friar's hands, ignite the thatch, stand back. Hatchling blackbirds flutter from the pyre. 100 AD. Briefly listed the protagonists of clinically sanctioned sentience. Serotonin, dopamine. Person A and person B meet inside a classroom, lobby, office, chapel, diner, park, or party. And then we got some more down here. Perhaps it's Lorca's thousand-window dance hall where persons A, persons B first kiss, hear violins, whisper prayers at gravestones, mortars, wrap, and ribbons, kneel or nap beside the banks of wild hyacinths. You know, you fell. What yours was, theirs is. Expositions grow shameless. Beauty is forgiven. And I've got pages and pages of notes beyond that aren't in any coherent order. But, yeah, that's kind of where I am with this part.
So when you were able to put that on paper or type it or whatever, what did that do for you?
Wow. Thank you for asking that, because you just asking that, you made me realize that it was catharsis, and it was it was more than catharsis. It was catharsis. It was, I think some of my earliest poems were attempts to mimic what I thought poets were supposed to do, and that's not an uncommon story, but this was one of the first poems that I felt myself saying something that I really just truly needed to say to be in the world the way that I needed to. And now, kind of thinking about that, answering your question, I'm kind of feeling that again.
All right. Please share another piece with us.
Sure. Okay. This one is called Episode. And this, a little explanation on this one. This is my attempt to write about a psychotic episode I experienced back in 2005. It's kind of an old one, but, well, the poem is not old, but the episode is, thankfully. So, Episode. Dear Dopamine, the summer you left, poems were at their greatest risk of hillsides, leeward slopes, and wasp-loud gullies, long-stemmed stargazers tilting skyward. What's left to confess? I sat on hills and stared at flowers. I scoured stacks of files for the lineage of your departure, lit a barrel for my bloodline, burned the day rooms where my uncle heard his silver tooth emitting music, the nurse who scribbled sleep-veined below each dose of Thorazine, every angel heard wandering the tender lines of fugues. You know what's carved across the tree I come from. You know because you carved it. I suspect you are the one who pulls a stunt like Moria, the burning ram. Were you afraid your chosen listened only to your absence, your mother tongue of thunderheads unspooling into wings? I'm as unfit to slaughter a son as I am to father a faith. Still, I've ended days with kitchen knives twined to curtain rods, hacksaws dangling from a skylight. When you filled my mother's house with copperheads, they wore my mother's face. They played nocturnes at her piano. They chopped her wild sage. Now, let me tell a story you know, because you are its origin. Once there was a hill. My legs bloomed into lotuses. How tired are you of hearing crickets? Right. Once I had no skin. I wore a scrim of wings and stridulating limbs. All of this made noises. I, too, grew sick of them. Thank you.
Wow. Benjamin, do you come from a literary background? And part two of the question is, what did you learn growing up about writing?
Oh, wow. The answer to that first part is no, not a particularly literary background. Although, you know, my she's a voracious reader, and there were always books in the house, and they say that is kind of one of the precursors of the, you know, formation of literacy in children. Although I actually, to be honest with you, I struggled a lot as a reader as a child. Without going into too much detail, some things happened during childhood, which led to some adjustment issues going on. School was hard, and reading, especially during early childhood, was very hard. I wouldn't say I really kind of caught on as a reader until maybe, for me, it was late, actually. I did read in middle school and high school, but I didn't really start reading until probably college, not voraciously. And then, you know, to the other question, I'm sorry, what was part two?
What did you learn growing up about writing?
Gotcha. Actually, the answer to that question relates to the first one. The first document I ever wrote was a letter to somebody that harmed me, and I was, I think, 5 years old at the time, and it was my grandmother, actually, who was a counselor and had helped students in similar situations, and she encouraged me to put my voice onto the page, essentially. And I didn't really know it at the time, but in a sense, I was kind of writing what would be the seed of many of the poems that I'd return to later over the next few decades, which is kind of a trip now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I learned that writing was a way to say things to people, to yourself, and I don't know that these lessons were ever kind of explicit, and they're just kind of things that I've thought about and reflected on later. But I think those were my earliest experiences with writing, trying to give voice to this thing that made no sense to me. And
wow,
yeah.
You know, it's funny. You've answered most of the questions that I usually ask, and we're only 24 minutes in. So if something sounds repetitive, bear with me, please. Please bear with me.
No.
Because okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Engel. What were you saying? My fault.
No. The question that I usually ask is, what was an early experience where you learned that poetic language had power? Now, the letter that you wrote, it sounds as if it was not a poem, I don't believe. Am I correct? It was just more a letter.
Correct.
Right.
Yep, that's absolutely true.
So in terms of poetry, I mean, how did you segue into poetry then? When did you learn that it had power?
Man, I think discovered the power of poetry. And it's funny because in fourth grade I took a class called Poetry Power, and I wrote this corny little cinquain, I think. But no, I think I was probably in 10th grade, and I had it was a philosophy teacher, and a lot of poets have as kind of their origin story. A high school teacher of some kind of opens their eyes to the power of poetry. So I'm no exception in that regard. It was 10th grade. It was philosophy, and he got bored partway through the year of teaching philosophy. So he just made it into a poetry class, which as a teacher, that's, by many people's standards, that's questionable pedagogy, but I have a soft spot in my heart still to this day for teachers that did stuff like that, and whatever it looks like on paper. And what he did is he read a slam poem called The Eulogy of Jimmy Christ by Reggie Gibson. And I don't know why I keep making that distinction, slam poem. I shouldn't, because this poem just blew my mind away. I know there's kind of this move against by many people using the kind of mystical or like magical lexicon to describe their engagement with poetry, but I can't avoid it. I really can't. This was a mystical experience. Part of it was just the sounds. It was a form of music I didn't know that you could make by throwing words together. Part of it, I had to have had some kind of a synesthetic experience. Like what I saw was psychedelic. I saw things it was so vivid. What else? Him up there reading the poem. He was so in love with the words himself, and I think I was 16 at the time, and that was the first time that I realized that you could love something like that. I mean, I love my parents, and there were people in my life that I loved, but love, I don't know, an idea or a discipline or something like that. And I didn't know how much I needed it until that moment when it was appearing before me. And I've tried to move closer and closer to that. Some years have been better than others when it comes to that, but that's been the journey, I guess.
I'm just so touched by what you're sharing, because to me you epitomize what I like this program to be about. People sharing their stories, feeling comfortable doing so, talking about how poetry somehow assisted them in whatever way, shape, or form, navigate through life, the good, bad, and indifferent of life. So, again, I'm enjoying what I'm hearing so much, and I just want to thank you again for being my guest. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. That's very kind, and thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for asking such thoughtful questions. And I wanted to say about the repetition, as somebody,
yes.
Not that you've repeated, but as somebody, I'm getting a little giddy right now because I am a repeater. I hear myself saying the same thing all the time, and I'm like, oh, just did it again, but whatever. It's a thing. But thank you, seriously.
Well, let me ask this question before we take a quick break. All great writers, and you've mentioned a few, have great writing influences. Who are some of yours, and what makes them great in your eyes?
I think I'm one of these poets that a lot of the people I look to are contemporary, and they are my contemporaries, and some of them are even kind of like in my age group, which the distinction shouldn't matter, but conditioning. Terrence Hayes is the poet I mentioned first, and I think he has probably had one of the most formative impacts on my love of poetry, my understanding of what poetry on the page can do, and also out loud, because he's an amazing poet in every regard, but the way that he reads his poetry, I think is amazing. It's phenomenal. Otherworldly in a sense. So him, I think, is one of my earliest formative influences. Charles Simic, kind of I feel like I honed or tried to use kind of his poems to hone my imagistic focus. So I was answering earlier, sound is kind of one of my ways into poems. Image is kind of one of my others. So yeah, a lot of my imagery, I think, comes from having him rattling around in my head. Oh man, so many more. Diane Seuss is a poet whose poems I am currently in love with. Her most recent collection, Frank Sonnets. I'm on, I don't know how many rereads of that. I think her voice, her approach to autobiography that explores the self but without centering the self is, I'm in awe of that. I still don't know how to do that, and I would love to learn. There's Diane Seuss, D.A. Powell. I mentioned Tiana Clark earlier. I love the permissions that she gives herself in her poems, that she takes and creates. Permissions to break conventions apart, permissions to be as bold or as vulnerable as she needs to be in her poems, to be kind or to be rigorous with herself, with others, kind of this constant push toward a more enriched and joyous existence. I'm not a joy poet, and I don't know that even with several lifetimes I will be. But I really admire poets that can do that. And I don't want to say that she's a joy poet that's reductive, but it's definitely something that I see her trying to do in her poems. It's push toward that, and it. I keep saying I'm in awe of it. I got to find a better thing, but it's really it's something I aspire to do myself because I can't.
All right. Well, let's take a brief break, Benjamin, and we'll be right back.
Awesome.
We are back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I am here with Benjamin Goldberg, a name that you will remember. A poet on the rise. That's how I view you, Benjamin.
Say that one more time, please. My fault.
I said you're a poet on the rise.
Oh, thank you.
A name to remember.
Thank you. You said something really
There, I
kind.
put your name up in lights, and you were not even around this year. I had spotlighted your name, and you were somewhere with a latte. You know. All right, Benjamin.
Yes,
some poets claim that a poem is like a living creature. Once it's out there, there's not much you can do to correct or improve it, while others edit meticulously, not leaving much from the original draft form. What is your take on the editing process?
So I think my instinct with most questions about process and craft is to do this kind of reflexive, like, oh, there's so many different approaches, and that almost goes without saying, but I think this is something that I will kind of take a firm stance on. I'm a rigorous editor and reviser, and that is kind of over the past, I'd say, 8 years, just almost become a hindrance.
All right.
But I think, like, actually, my answer to that does it relates to the borderline diagnosis, and I guess my experience with the condition. So if you'll permit me kind of a weird, loopy kind of answer, one of the kind of core features of borderline is an unstable sense of self, and and what that can look like in my life is just kind of tumultuous moods, but also kind of sudden and sometimes even seismic seeming shifts in like direction or trajectory, kind of like, you know, dropping out of school or going back to school or changing a career or something like that. Just so when it comes to the editorial process, and I've heard people say this, kind of seeing multiple people who've seen my work, you know, workshops and things like that. You know, a poem will look a certain way in one draft, and it will be, not just in a different form or kind of the language is honed, but like it will be an entirely different poem in a subsequent draft, and then kind of I might decide to kind of take it back. So, and again, I know that's not unique to me necessarily, but I think that's one thing I do with the editorial process, or I try to do, is like keep space for the possibility that this poem really is meant to be, it could be countless different things concurrently. If you actually, so part of why I was disassociated earlier when we came back from the break is I'm looking at this absolutely ungodly labyrinthian document where all my poems are, and each poem has like 17 or 18 or 19 or 30 drafts, and they all look different. And I'm like, oh dang, where's this? So again, I can get lost in it. But I'm very literally lost in it.
It's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Thank you.
Benjamin, please share a poem. Share a poem, my friend. Share a poem.
All right, let's do a short one. So a little prefatory note here. In the book I'm working on, it's kind of the idea of fugues, or kind of the fugue is as a form is important to the collection, not just because of the, I guess, polyvalence with multiple voices, the psychological kind of connotations with fugue states and things like that, but also again, with borderline, there can be oftentimes like these unintegrated pieces of the self, and I think one of the ways I'm trying to capture that is by having these different kind of me personified, but also kind of distinct personas. And one of them is Boy Lucius, which is, I believe, in Titus Andronicus, kind of the grandchild of Titus, who is this servant of the Roman Empire, who kind of does horrifying things in service of empire, not unlike the history of any empire, and is basically just betrayed by the empire that he gave his life to. And Boy Lucius is kind of his oblivious or unwitting, might be unfair terms, but just his grandkid. And this is called Boy Lucius's Insomnialogue, Garden Party. Along the columns and cross beams of our pergolas, vines are wending like garden snakes. Burgers hiss on grills. Jet skis shred the man-made lake as horseflies mate on ice cubes melting in the amber blur of cognac. We mean so earnestly to overthrow this portrait of a cul-de-sac. Our principal models the proper form for shin-kicking a maple. A classmate's mother, drifting toward him, strips her breeze-thin cardigan to reveal a second sleeve of playing cards and dragons. My grandfather steps onto the patio wearing only his longbow, sling, and socks. People notice. People talk. Our fireworks are hours late and flowering loudly. Whatever beast we all agree to call the sky, he knocks and sends an arrow through its eye. Thank you.
Wow. Does it hurt you to write poetry, Benjamin? If not, why not?
That is one of the experiences I've had. And quite honestly, yes, sometimes it does. And when it does, so yeah, I guess we'll start with that part. Yeah, it does. And sometimes it's hard to write the poem that you need to write. Sometimes what you're confronting hurts you back. Sometimes sometimes the poem also, I don't know. I know kind of this idea exists that the poet is distinct from their work and who they are as a human is not the same as who they are on the page. And I do understand that. I think for me, I will say, though, that any progress I've made as a poet has made me a more fully embodied person. And the same is true for setbacks. Like, the further I step away from my own humanity, like, the worse my poems get. And it's a constant thing. But and likewise, think kind of gains and growth and work I've done in my personal life, I think has influenced my poetry for the better. So when I'm hurt by a poem, sometimes it's because it's a lack of fidelity to the poem.
All right.
Usually it's a lack of fidelity to myself.
I want to throw two more adjectives in there. Two more adjectives. Has a poem that you've written ever humbled or frightened you?
Yes, both.
A resounding yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Can I start with the fear?
Yes.
There's a poem that I wrote many years ago, and I'm still, like, it's published and it has a life. It has its own life, but I keep coming back to it, and it's called Doghead, and it is the working title of the book, and there are a bunch of poems with the title, which is one of the conventions, I guess, but whatever. And that poem scares me. It scares me because I don't know what it says about me. Sometimes you understand that you're naked in ways, or transparent, I guess, in ways to people that you aren't aware of.
Yes.
And there's kind of like, I don't know if it's unfair to say a vulnerability in that, but there's like, what am I telegraphing, and what am I not seeing? And but it's more than that. I think I think the poem focuses on some really kind of horrifying subject matter, and I can read some of it later, but and I don't know that my relationship to that subject matter is entirely where it should be, quite frankly. I think there's some of what's wrong with me is in this poem, and I haven't found it all.
Well, if you feel comfortable sharing parts of it now, you can.
Sure. Yeah. So, if it's okay, a little prefatory note on this one. I remember when I was a teenager, was hanging out with some people and, friends of friends and all of that. And one of these friends of friends, people I didn't know, acquaintances, etc., came in, and he was telling a story in southeastern Michigan, is where I grew up, suburban Detroit. And one thing that you'll see kind of throughout Michigan are there's these abandoned psychiatric facilities that kind of litter the landscape. And I mean, not make it sound like they're everywhere, but there are at least 3 within driving distance. And he was exploring one of them, as a lot of kids there did. And he was talking about, in one of the tunnels beneath one of these facilities, he found a crucified dog. And I never questioned it. It looked, based on the way that his face looked, that he was telling the truth. Like, it was almost like he was in that tunnel. He could have been lying for all I know. It didn't look like it, but the idea of that kind of haunted me then, and I didn't realize I'd kept it with me for like a decade plus until I wrote this poem, and I'm still not done with it. So this is called Doghead. We want to see, not God, but dog, crucified too, we'd heard, beneath the asylum tunnels, and one of them a cistern, a mound of concrete sledgehammered and pickaxed to dirt. We heard but didn't see. On the mound, a plywood cross, each plank 3 feet. We heard but didn't see, a smooth shank nail through each paw. On the hill and the tunnel, the fur stained the darkness golden. Long since retrieved, the dollar store tiara, silver glitter still behind the ears, jowls, lips, and teeth streaked with lipstick. We want to see. Psychiatric ruin, pharmaceutical zoo, heaven a shard of its name once. We bring haven a shard of its name once. We bring enough E to make it heaven. The plywood shutters were pried open prior to us. We are still trespassing. We are still breaking. We wedge ourselves through the window and step into the intake room. Pardon me. A dripped and echo lends the darkness its dimensions. The flashlights lend us our memories. Counter, wall-mounted chair, water fountain fixtures, no fountain. Files scattered into a new floor, an account of something unseen that died nearby. Told by the buzzing of flies. Some water, a flood, an alibi. Now this poem goes on for 3 more pages, and I'm actually kind of writing a rejoinder to it, even like 8 years later. But yeah, some kind of scary subject material that hasn't quite left me.
Well, I can appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I'm wondering, do you live your life like it's a poem? That's a way out there question.
No, that's I love that. Not a coherent poem, but yes.
Okay.
I think I do.
All right.
A poem that needs substantial revision, but yes, I do.
Okay. I like that. I can say the same, my friend. Well, let me ask this question: Do you think you were meant to be a poet? Were you meant to be a poet?
Yeah. I say
tell me
very
more.
few things with certainty. What's that?
I said, tell me more in terms of why you feel you were meant to be a poet.
I think it's really the poet Kaveh Akbar talks about this, and the way that he described his kind of aha, I'm a poet moment really resonate. You know, the way I've heard him describe it really resonates with me and kind of echoes, or mine echoes his a little bit. Which is, you know, he said his English teacher in high school, there's a story that he tells, and he describes it as kind of like trumpets in the sky, aha, you're a poet. And I think I had a version of that with poetry, and it was really the only thing I've ever felt called to do. Teaching is, I think, wonderful and rewarding in its own right, in so many ways. It's challenging and frustrating. I have things I'm, very much struggle with it. Things I think I do well with it. But it isn't a calling, if I'm being honest. Not the way poetry is.
All right.
I think poetry is the one thing I've been sure about this entire time.
What surprises you most about being a poet?
I think the capacity for all of the contradictions that exist within a person or a space, that they can be explored and influenced and worked with and engaged with and shaped into something. And I guess that's any art, I suppose, but poetry is the one that made sense. What fascinates me is, I think, like, I'll see. Sorry, I lost the thread. I got so astounded. I think trying to the fact that I can put two contradictory things together, or that I can go into a space that I've never actually been into, or explore an idea, and that time can exist simultaneously, and that, like, all of these different parts of my life that still kind of, even having worked through them in so many ways, still revisit and still don't make sense. The fact that poetry is a place where they can make sense. Like, poetry, here's the answer. I think we're getting there. It feels kind of like a physical space sometimes. You know, it really does feel like a physical place where things happen, like where these images kind of do create a sort of almost spatial texture sometimes. And I know that's not physically happening, but my brain doesn't care. My brain doesn't make that distinction. And the fact that I can grow in these spaces, or demolish things that I did not get a chance to demolish, or deconstruct, or confront, or prostrate, or pray, or, that's, I don't know. To me, that's pretty sacred.
And it's very nice. Beautifully stated. Benjamin, so much is happening in our world. There's the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent. So much is happening. So much.
Yeah.
What do you view as being the role of a poet in modern-day society?
I think that is a question that I will answer by saying I think it really does. It does vary from poet to poet. I speak very reticently about things that all poets should be doing or shouldn't be doing.
Okay.
I think all poets, like all people, should do their absolute best to not cause intentional harm, and to be aware of the harm that they do cause when they do inevitably cause harm, because it is inescapable in so many ways, I believe. But apart from that, I think what a poet's role can be, some poets want to witness, some poets want to, want to sing and pray and and celebrate. And some poets want to kind of deconstruct. And so I think for me, I think I'm going to go back to survival. I'm trying to create a map of that survival, and I'm trying to do it in a way that's authentic to me, but also could give a model for somebody else that might need it. One thing that I often found upsetting, kind of growing up, and frustrating and sometimes even just destructive, was when people would give you these platitudes about how you were supposed to be. They would say you need to love yourself, or you need to, you need to believe in yourself or be yourself, or these things that we just say, right? Which are, on the surface, they're true, and and they make sense. But where's the roadmap? How do we get there? What are the thousands and thousands and millions of micro labors that we need to engage in on a second-to-second basis to kind of shift the direction of a self toward, especially a self that does not know how to love itself, toward loving itself, or toward wholeness, or toward integration. I think that is something that I am trying to explore. It's not just the destination, but the map.
All right, very nice. You're in the schools, and I commend you for that.
Thank you.
And I wonder sometimes, in terms of poetry, how privileged is it? Is it accessible to the common man or woman? By non-binary, whoever. Is it accessible? What do you think? How privileged is it?
And I think that I'm glad you made that distinction, because I think we're getting to the point where, I don't want to say we, but it is permeated the discourse more and more that privilege is so multifaceted, and there are so many dimensions in which a person can experience marginalization or privilege, and that they can coexist, right? Multiple identities can coexist, and again, that's not my idea, it's not an original idea, but I think it depends on that intersection, right? The intersection that makes you. I think it really does. So, for instance, I think if you are, let's say, in school and I'm teaching a predominantly like Eurocentric poetic canon that focuses on quote unquote traditional European forms, then that is not necessarily, not that it's not accessible, but that I think that would be a manifestation of that privilege. I think as far as kind of the idea of accessibility and there being a requisite level of literacy, which is something that, you know, people say about poetry a lot, which, yeah, that I get that. I think the accessibility debate, this is where I've got a different vantage point, and that's oftentimes poems that are literal and accessible and linear, not that all of those things need to be true about a poem, but I often find them alienating. I find them really inconsistent with the life I've lived. And I will claim in this sense, I will claim neurodivergence, because I believe that, you know, my experience has kind of reflected that. And a lot of poems that, you know, just kind of are pretty transparent, are on the surface what they are, that kind of open themselves to easy interpretation. I think there's this belief that if you're doing something beyond that, you're alienating people, and that an inaccessible poem is inaccessible to all. And I got to work through my ideas on that, because I'm not sure they're totally coherent. But a lot of the poems people point to as kind of trying to break through that, I find inaccessible.
I'm wondering, it does make sense. I'm wondering, as you think about your being a poet, where does your poetic doubt begin? And where does it end?
Oh, man.
How much can a poem do?
So many good questions. My poetic doubt, I think, begins with my self-doubt. And that begins the absolute kind of core of who I am. And I think kind of healing for me and wholeness for me and honesty for me is saying that out loud and not pretending that that's not the truth, right? I think being able to say, yeah, you don't believe in yourself the way that you're told to, and you don't believe in yourself as a poet the way that you feel like you need to. I think that's me trying to combat that self-doubt. But yeah, going back to your question, I'm kind of rambling, but that it begins with everything I doubt about myself, which is still to this day most of everything, and constantly. So kind of hinders revision in a lot of cases, but also I know that when something does come through that, it's made it, right? It belongs. It's gone through the gauntlet of that. And I think as far as a poet's role, wait, that wasn't the question you asked. Is that what you asked?
No, not this time.
My fault.
I'm throwing so much at you at one time. I apologize. You're doing a fantastic job fielding all of my questions. You really are. Well, look, we've reached the time in the program that I view as, for me, my favorite time. It's what I call a mini, M-I-N-I, poetry concert. So what I'd like you to do is to share 3 poems back to back, no interruptions from me. And we'll talk on the other side, all right? The stage is yours.
Sounds good.
Everyone, Benjamin Goldberg. All right.
All right. Poem 1 is Fugue with Chemical Restraints in 2 Decades. And this covers April 1999 to July 2019. I'm in 9th grade and off somewhere still sulking. Bathroom, stairway, backstage behind the fall of Rome or wind comes sweeping down the plain. I'm violet-haired and mirror-eyed. I'm skipping art like I skip much of being alive. In the tattered sketch pad, a slaughtered flower sheds its petals. A man I've yet to meet smells the clouds before he sees them. A moth at heart like many. He stumbled toward the bridge as if the skyline is his answer. We're playing laser tag. We sweep the labyrinth of fog machines and catwalks. We fire on foam board bunkers, storm each mirror at the center, light them red and green. I don't see the dead or living. Like many I live among, I see a scream. Minarets rippling in a river. Another dawn. Our cul-de-sac bursting into flags. Years of this. I quit my meds. I quit again. We fire from foam board bunkers. We are fires with batteries for backs. Curtains. Ballot. I try to vote a letter from the alphabet. I try to vote the future off its axis. The future. I'm in a classroom being a teacher. In the classroom, there are children being children. The only surface here that stops a bullet is cinder block. I'm in an auditorium being told I need to know this. A drill. A door shakes wildly despite our silence. Flee or hide or flight. We're someplace doing something. From this window, a bookshelf marks the end of any fatal line of sight. Life or not, difference then. The peeled spine of a copy of a lesson before dying. Another child is called a crime. A friend scrubs ashes from steel shelves in a pharmacy. This country speaks clearly. This country means to go on happening in every city, street, and spine. Each lane fills with marchers. On the bus, the man beside me talks as if I am his mirror. Why do the shadows want to burn the streets, he asks. I am his mirror because I do not speak. Next drill, code red. The door is quiet despite our violence. Hours earlier, a curtain, a ballot hacked in half. Now arrives so recklessly. I'm scrolling down the sounds I have yet to renounce. I wake, it's televised. The festival is being televised, lawns and stalls and so much sky. My cousin selling garlands made of garlic. The nation thinks, the nation prays. She survives. And this next poem is called Song. And it recreates and recombines the language from Bridget P. Kelly's amazing poem, Song. Because we once and thought to. Because we were boys, we taught boys how to. Because we girl each other, then rope. Because we bleat and stroke. Because the woods or school or moon and harder worked, we joked. Because we heard, we hurt. Because we bed the blood, or because the bleeding hung. Because we trained to track and miles away, and still the sweetness of the blackberries we hacked. Because we belonged to broken thorns. Because running hid the stars. Because bushes brushed us in the dark. Because we're strange in storm, and now we come to harm. Because we pass, we stone and strip the branches. Because we, the empty yard. Because the heart head is alive and sings like eyes and wild fruit. Because we listen. Because our bottles fill with flies. Because our mothers called us our little songs. Their little songs. Because our hands. Because we have them. Because the loudness of the missing. Because only this is never missing. And then the last poem I'll read. To find it. is called Devlog Entry 1, and this is about game development, which is a new hobby. When you're this new, each blueprint takes at least an hour to script. 15-minute YouTube walkthrough of a single node that spindles like a synapse snarled with plaque. Countless pauses, 2 rewinds at minimum. It feels made up, the code, like you're a child or a trope of childness, no more than 5 years old and armored in your mother's bathrobe, head beneath a bucket, standing on a fire hydrant declaring, activate plasma force field with razor laser space teeth. But oh, you right-click on the event graph, summon functions from an XY vertex. You drag the execution lines toward inputs, hit compiled, and fire up the world, and now there is a force field hovering in game space, complete with teeth. You script the macros to unfold a maze the player crawls through, spawn portals growing cobalt behind the hedgerows surrounded with AI. You would make an awful god, that's all you know. The hundreds of redundant nodes you cache inside a single socket will animate a player's bones. The same abstractions panel every object, actor, every scene or sky, atmospheric light, sphere and breeze, damage and resistance, perimeter, the HUD. The player spawns, the player sees. Thank you.
Wow. You know, your work is the kind of poetry that you need to allow to just kind of settle in and ruminate over it. We do have a caller, Benjamin. We have a caller, my friend. Okay. I'd like to bring this person on. The area code is 630. The first 3 numbers are 467. You're on the air with Benjamin. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Benjamin.
Hello, sir.
How are you? Michael Lee Johnson here.
Yes, how are you, Michael Lee Johnson? All right.
I'm all right.
I have a question for Benjamin.
I had actually a couple of questions. Benjamin, I'm sort of impressed. You know, I live in Itasca, Illinois, which is only about 18 miles out of Chicago, where Poetry Magazine is located. Mm-hmm. I noticed that you've been published there 1, 2, 3 times.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think I'm in there. Once. I think in 2006. Feels a while ago, but yeah.
I mean, it's one. It's not. How do I say this? You know, I don't know that much about the most popular or the most prestigious poetry publications in the world, but Poetry does rank in the top 5. And actually, outside of one in England that I can think of that I can't remember right now, Poetry Reader or something, I don't know. Poetry has traditionally been classified as one of the most prestigious publications to be published in. So I'm sort of impressed with that, and I just want you to know that.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
Very nice.
No, I got another question for you, though. I listened to you with the poem, I believe it was called Doghead.
Mm-hmm.
The version that you read is one different than what I was reading on Poetry. The one I'm reading on Poetry appears to be more like a poetic prose poem. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
I found it quite interesting. Normally, I don't like longer poetic poems, but this one was pretty intriguing. You know, about a bulldog out in the playgrounds, etc. And it went on. You know, I finished mazes with a green Quran, etc. Loved the last line. On the right side of his face, I drew a sunny day. I signed my name. All right, but it was, I created many different versions of the same poem because over time they've changed. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering what happened here. Is this the same poem, a different poem, or something that perhaps evolved?
Well, first of all, that's really surreal and sweet, you reading the poem to me like that. So thank you for that. I've forgotten about that one for a while. It's both. If I'm being honest, it's both. Literally it is a different poem. and it does share the same title. And I think kind of in the sense of earlier when we were talking about kind of so many of us, we and you said this too, right, Michael? We write the same poem over and over, right?
Right. Well, sometimes I don't know if you're the same way, but I mean, I've had poems that have evolved over time, and sometimes I can't even recognize the different versions because they've changed so much. And I was just wondering if this might be one of those, or if they're totally different.
In this case, they are different poems, but but the other poem that shares its name with Doghead, in a sense, they are all one. I mean, it sounds corny, but they are all part of the same poem. They're part of the same constellation of ideas, and I think they're just different ways that those ideas have come out and those images have come out.
I think you're right about that. Because when I was reading it, and I did read the whole thing, of course I can't pronounce the D-A-E-D-A-L-U-S, but I do recognize it as a mythology. Okay. But anyway, it's just an interesting poem. Like I said, I don't really normally like reading prose poems, but I started reading this, and I sort of got into it. And, reading the images and seeing behind the images, and listening to the shorter version that you gave, and I said, you know what, in some crazy way, they seem totally unrelated, but yet maybe sort of related.
Mm-hmm. All right, very nice. All right, thank you, Michael.
I got one other question. I'll let you go real quick.
Yes.
In the beginning when I was writing poems, oftentimes I wrote poems seeking my own way out of my own mental hell. Okay, and I'm serious about that. And Michael Ingram and we've spoken together about this, and it's nothing that unusual with poets because sometimes I think, poets are geniuses, but they get classified as mentally ill. But the fact of the matter is, I'm just wanted to ask this question. Do you think there's a point in time when a poet progresses from writing about his own scenario, his own mental state, where it is almost depressing and maybe over time evolves into joy?
Wow. I certainly hope so. I think I believe in the possibility of that. I'm part of a support group that one of the tenets that we kind of emphasize in that support group is kind of realistic expectations for recovery and for wellness. And I think I don't want to take forever to answer this. I don't want to ramble, but there's a lot to say. I think on the one hand, I believe in that ideal of a kind of life that is joyous, or I have to. And yet I know that it would not take the form that I envision kind of even having that thought. I think, and I still think that the path that led me to that state, that leads me to that place of joy, if I get there, if a poet gets there more broadly, I think that still diffuses itself into the poems that they write. So I think getting to a place where I think wellness. I'm just going to end at wellness. Place of wellness. Mm-hmm. That might be.
Yeah, I think I guess maybe I should have phrased it a little bit more concisely. I guess if I were to say it more succinctly, I would say something to the effect: do we ever, as poets, go from the point where our writing is therapy to where our writing ultimately takes us to a place of more subtle, stable joy? That
very nice.
Way of putting it.
Excellent question. That's an excellent question. All right. Anyway, Benjamin, you need to know. Well, let's say this. You need to know, Benjamin, that Michael Lee Johnson's not just another typical caller. He's a superstar in the field of poetry. His name is extremely well known. So I want you to look him up. He's a good man to know. A good man to know.
Right now.
Mm-hmm. But I was trying to find you, by the way. I was taking a look while I was listening tonight to you, and I was looking on. I've had some problems with Facebook because they don't like me anymore. But the bottom line is I was also looking you up on what's the other site that, the ones that the younger people use quite often. Just
Twitter? Instagram?
No, there you go. Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find you there, Benjamin. Were you on there?
Not really, no.
Yeah, well, you know what? I never was either because I never wanted to be there, until I got booted out of Facebook. I've learned actually, surprisingly, it's to a younger audience, which I didn't really want to know that much about. But the reality is that actually it's sort of interesting because it opens up a whole new avenue to different people than what we're accustomed to. But I noticed, I don't know, how old are you, Benjamin?
I'm 38.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm a lot younger than you. I'm just kidding. But I remember you saying something about your favorite poets were, some of those younger ones, but I don't know. I'm surprised you're not on Instagram, and not that it matters that much.
Well,
but anyway, listening was a joy talking to you. I'm just very happy to run across you. Michael will give me hell later, okay?
Michael, I will talk to you later. Thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah, no problem.
I enjoyed listening to you.
Benjamin,
Beautiful.
I wish you the
Fantastic.
best, and I really do enjoy your poetry.
Thank you, Michael. I
really hope that you're going to be out there banging with the top of the line, all right? I think you're probably
that's a nice thing to say.
All right.
That's beautiful. Oh, that's so nice.
Right.
Wow.
Good night now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Bye-bye.
See, Benjamin, there are great things in store for you, man. There are great things in store. Great things in store because, to me, if you just continue to be yourself, continue to speak your message. Wow. Well, we've almost come to the end of our journey, Benjamin. But I would like to ask you one more question, if that's okay.
Sure.
And then I'd like you to end with a poem to take us home on a high note. All right. Here we go. Writers and poets write for a myriad of reasons. Some write primarily to speak a message to their audience. Others write because to stay silent is not an option. Why do you write?
Why do I write? I think I'm going to go with silence isn't an option. Silence isn't an option. If I don't put it on paper, it's still getting said. It's just getting said inside me, and it's getting said over and over and over. I was actually just having this conversation with, it was an acquaintance, but I think we connected over. She posed a question on Facebook, and she asked, "What do you do to take care of yourself?" And a lot of the self-care talk I kind of tune out, but she wasn't doing that. She was legitimately interested in how people kind of stay well or move toward wellness. And I said, what did I say to her? I said something like, if I stop fighting the unwellness when I feel it, it passes faster. And usually it's there because it tries to tell me something. It's trying to speak. It's trying to communicate. And I spent many, many years not listening to that. And I think poetry is a way of listening to that and letting it speak, and then kind of let myself speak with it, I guess. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does make sense. It does make sense. But please share one more piece, and we'll close.
All right. Let me see if I can find this. There was one actually I was really excited about, and it's somewhere. Okay. think we're getting there. Yes, here it is. Okay. This is kind of after Kim Adonisio, her poem, To the Woman Crying Uncontrollably in the Next Stall. I love that poem, and wanted to kind of respond to that in a way. And this one's called To the Boy Breaking His Fist Against a Wall. If a room's description ever made you witness the elided crimes within, if you were ever forced to see once more because you saw just once, to hold a loved one you found shivering and hidden, found and held yourself like this, tender ever after even to the most welcome touch, if you stalked the socials, mapped each habit, and tracked the architect of sadness to where he smirked back at you through sheetrock, fiberglass, brick, petals, plaster, canvas, windows, cinder block, or skin. If some abuser lives across the ocean, country, city, hallway, screen, or sky. If you tried, as told, forgiveness, but no, because fuck that. If all of this, if none, but still this wall, please listen now, your hand is speaking, each bone is softness, each brick, please listen, there is so much softness. Thank you.
Wow. Benjamin, where can listeners find your work, my friend?
Presently, the poetry one, and then it's actually a new poem is coming out in this year's edition of Best New Poets. So Best New Poets 2022. I got a new poem coming out, and the rest I got some stuff scattered around online. Trying to rebuild a website. That's stay tuned for that, I guess.
All right. How can listeners stay in touch?
If you want to contact me, you can email me at benrossgoldberg@gmail.com. If you have questions or kind of want to talk, let me know. I'll be there.
Wow. Very nice. What's next for you? Where do you go from here?
Short term, back to school. Long term,
all right.
I'd like to get this book finished. I am on more rewrites than I can even count, and at this point, I have to just admit to myself that I'm stalling. And
all right.
All right.
All right. I understand. Well, I'd like to thank you, Benjamin, for being with me tonight. I've really enjoyed our time together. I really have. Your work touches me. Just the fact that you're so open and so willing to talk about your experiences, your lived experiences, that really touches me. It really touches me. And I'd like you to come back. I've got a couple of ideas, and I'd like you to come back.
I love ideas, and I'd love to come back. And Dr. Ingram, thanks for having me, and thank you for asking such wonderful questions. And thanks for talking to me.
All right, good people. We've made it through another one. A wonderful, wonderful program. And as I share with you every time we get together, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, everyone. Good night, Benjamin.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night, Dr. Ingram. Bye.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at QLPOR.com.